Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen, Bill G., and Alex King here. Today is Tuesday, February the 26th, 2019. It's 4 p.m. in New York, 1 p.m. in Los Angeles, 9 p.m. in London, Sydney, Australia. It's good morning. It's 8 o'clock there. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for tuning in for yet another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And I'm happy that we're here at all because it's been a technical issue day, but those technical issues are now behind us. We're live. We're ready to go. And we're off to a good start from now on. My mindset is now everything's going to go smoothly. Everything is going smoothly. Everything's wonderful. How am I doing so far, guys? Hey, you got to start somewhere, you know. That's the way it is.
You got to fake it till you make it,
You got to fake it till you make it. Well, actually, I'm not faking. I actually think it's going to go well now. So that's real. That's good. So.
All right.
How you doing, Alex? What's happening in your neck of the woods?
I'm better.
You're better? Better is better.
Yeah.
One step at a time. That's what you have to do sometimes.
Exactly.
That's so okay, good. Well, I won't even press the issue. I'll just say, great, you're better. That's the most important thing. And our friend Bill G's back. Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Hopefully most of the sick issues are behind us.
Yes.
Wife is feeling better. I'm feeling better.
Good to hear.
Although I have to say that this particular flu was very good at kicking your butt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you were experiencing the contrast in big form, so congratulations.
That's right.
That's right. So I figured that I figured we'd try something a little bit different today. I was looking at a post in the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group, and of course we live stream there as well as to our page. And this post raised a question, and I'll have to translate it a little bit because I think it was written by somebody who has English as a second language rather than as a first language. But the basic idea is pretty straightforward. It says, why couldn't everyone become a millionaire using the law of attraction so that there'd be no poverty? I thought that was an interesting question, and better than most of the questions that we see there on a regular basis. And I figured it'd be fun, first of all, to answer the question ourselves, and then, because it's one of those topics that gets a lot of responses, I found the responses to be almost as interesting as the topic itself. So I figured we could go through some of the responses and see what we have to say about them. Sound good to you guys?
Sounds
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me go to Bill first, all right? So why don't you address the question directly before we start tearing apart all the answers that people gave? You know, why couldn't everybody become millionaires? Why couldn't there be an elimination of poverty that way?
Well, there can be an elimination of poverty because when you are attracting what you need in your life, you're not necessarily going to become a millionaire, but if you get everything you need when you need it, then yes, you are abundant. And being abundant does not necessarily translate to a bank account per se, unless that's really how you're viewing it. But I think that, and also not everybody can be a millionaire, because everybody was a millionaire, then you would no longer have the contrast to, because that contrast is actually important. In order to understand abundance, you need to understand lack of abundance at the same time. And so if everybody has $1 million, everyone's a millionaire, everyone has everything they need, then there's nothing to strive for. There's nothing to attract.
Interesting take on that. How about you, Alex? What do you think?
I definitely agree with Bill. But I also want to add that I think everyone can become a millionaire. It's just, you're not going about it the right way. You're not vibrating high enough. You're not, manifesting in the right ways, and you're probably manifesting negative stuff first, which is causing you not to reach your goals.
That's good.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
That's good. Yeah. I'll go with that.
I actually did answer the question. I'll paraphrase rather than trying to find my answer. And Bill, this actually kind of took me back to the days when you and I did the previous radio show on PRN, because I pointed out that...
I almost answered it that way.
You almost did? Well, I actually did answer it that way, in part. Because I said, well, you really don't want to go after being a millionaire. Because, for instance, if you live in Zimbabwe, being a millionaire means you're penniless. Because their currency is virtually penniless. So you could have $1 million Zimbabwe dollars and you couldn't buy a stick of gum with it. So not really such a great idea to be a millionaire. What you want is the abundance. Like you guys have been pointing out, the abundance is what really comes down to. And abundance really means purchasing power. It means the ability to acquire what it is that you want, whether through buying it or through simply attracting it and it comes into your life, however you do it. But the point is, you want that abundant mindset, because that mindset is a mindset of everything that I want comes my way. It all works out the way I want it to work out, or it works out for the best, or however I want to think about it. But wealth is a mindset. In fact, somebody, and I want to go through some of these answers here because the answers were really interesting in many cases. One person said, well, wouldn't it be better if we could just, redistribute the wealth? And I instantly, again, went back to when we talked on the previous radio show and said, well, you could do that. But the problem is you could take all of the wealth in the world, distribute it equally among everybody. And in about 5 years from now, we'd be right back to the distribution we have right now. Because the mindset would not have changed. That's the problem. You got to change the mindset. It's not the physical pieces of paper or the properties or whatever. It's the mindset. So the mindset. And
actually, what's very telling about that is there's so many people who have won the lottery.
Yes.
People who are poor and win the lottery, they win like the Mega Millions, and within 2-3 years they're back to being poor again because they had no way of really managing the money, or they just blew it, or whatever. Or as soon as they got that abundant money, they were so afraid of it, or it was just not that they weren't in that abundant mindset, and so it just went just away, and then it was gone.
Yep. That's what happens.
And actually, a lot of times, these people end up in a worse situation than they were even before they won the lottery, because now they've got millions of dollars of debt on top of not having, because they were living a lifestyle where they were squandering it. They were digging themselves further, because when you've got that kind of capital, everyone's willing to give you a loan.
Yes. Yes. Hello, Mr. Bankruptcy Judge is what you're talking about.
Right.
Which in and of itself is an interesting thing. I once had, for many years I was a website developer, and I had a client who was an attorney in Virginia who dealt quite often with clients who were seeking bankruptcy. And he said, there's an amazing thing that happens where bankruptcy is concerned. There is a very small percentage of the population that repeatedly declares bankruptcy over and over and over and over and over again. They climb back, they acquire some wealth, they borrow to the hilt, and they go into the bankruptcy. And then they just keep doing it repeatedly. And I think about that, and I say to myself, what an interesting mindset that is. One that I certainly am glad I don't have. Because, talk about contrast, Bill. You were talking about contrast earlier. That person is living the contrast.
Right.
They're really in it. But, I think there's such a thing as dipping your toe in the contrast. You don't really have to dive in above your head. You can experience it either way. It's up to you. Which way do you want to do it? There's arguments on both sides, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, I wanted to go through some of these. So the first person who posted, I'll just name them by first name, but Diane posted, prayers for poverty, pray for the poor and the needy. I want to know what you guys think about that.
I think that's a good mindset to have.
Well, what are you praying for? Are you praying for them to gain wealth, or are you praying for them to learn abundance?
And if you're praying for poverty, aren't you really praying for poverty?
Yeah. You're praying for poverty. You're actually attracting poverty.
So, that was my comment to her. I recommend praying for abundance rather than for poverty if you really want to try to help somebody out somewhere along the way.
Right.
I pray that you remain poor. No, that doesn't work. So, okay, let's see. Farhana says, not everyone is a believer, not everyone wants to be a millionaire, and not everyone makes an effort with the law of attraction. What do you think of that?
Facts.
Yeah. And also, experience is, I mean, there's a quadrant on the SRT charts. One of the charts is called Learning is Fun. And one of those areas is experience is the process, which roughly translates to whatever question you're asking. The soul desires experience. And I think this was brought up with your conversation with Louis D'Souza yesterday when we were talking about homeless people.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of homeless people who have, they absolutely have nothing, but they felt enriched by the experience of being homeless because then they were able to let go of a lot of the trappings of being a homeowner / person with a job and whatever. And, I have actually personally known homeless people who are in grinding poverty, who are very happy people because they were able to, they feel free.
Mm-hmm.
And because they know where to get a meal, they know where to find shelter when they need it, they feel abundant.
Interesting
You're
thing,
grateful.
isn't it? How abundance gets defined so differently by different people. And we all tend to think that it's going to be defined the way we would define it. I think that X is abundance, so therefore everybody else thinks that X is abundant. But apparently not. That's not the way people think.
And the city where I live right now is considered a poor city. And because, we've got a pretty sizable homeless population and panhandlers and whatever. And it's interesting. Some people see these people and they're like, oh, that poor person, and see how they're suffering. And I look at them, I'm like, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing somebody who has chosen this life for whatever reason. I mean, they may not be having a lot of fun, but their souls have made a decision that they're going to experience something in this lifetime, and it's going to be that. And their soul is gaining from the experience.
Yeah, interesting. There's a scene from a television show that comes to my mind. The West Wing. There was a scene where Toby Ziegler, who is one of the West Wing staffers, he's one of the speechwriters, ends up trying to track down the family of a homeless vet who froze to death on a park bench. And as he's exploring one of the homeless sections, where they hang out, he finds the guy's brother and a friend of the guy's brother, and he's talking to the friend, and after he talks to him for a while and asks the friend, could you make sure that the guy is there for his brother's funeral, because they're going to put on a funeral for him and so forth, because he's a veteran, he deserves to be buried with honors and all this stuff. And then Toby tries to give him money, and the guy says he refuses to take the money. He says, you won't have enough money for the bus. Now, Toby Ziegler, could basically buy half the White House, but the guy's afraid he won't have enough money for the bus, which is, mindset. And it beautifully illustrates what the mindset differences can be. They're very, very different mindsets. But the guy was much more concerned about, now a fictional character, granted, but he was more concerned about the guy having money for the bus than taking the money that he himself might have been able to use. Very interesting.
Well, and also another concern that homeless people have is when people give them too much money, that they then become targets for muggings by other homeless people.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's
so they're
true.
not looking for you. When people are panhandling, they really are looking for change. They're looking for pocket change. They're not looking for somebody to hand them $100 bill, because that's a target.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's see. What else we have? Dan said, in answer to the question, why could not everyone become a millionaire using the law of attraction so there'd be no poverty? He says, well, they could, but that's not everyone's path. We all have our own lessons to learn in different ways, which is what you were saying, Bill.
Yes.
That's it in a nutshell. And then Angeliki, I guess it is. Angeliki says, because we grow up with the belief that money is bad and not for us.
Really?
You're not
Well,
convinced, Alex, I can tell.
I don't know what part of the world she's from, but
if it is
I'm
your
gonna
belief,
go with it. Yeah, everyone has their own belief, but hashtag nah, son.
if you believe that money is the root of evil, and I have a great example of this. My my mother-in-law a few years ago was had a falling out with her sister, and but they both owned a house together, and so she asked her sister to please buy her out of her house, so that way she had money to retire and whatever. And her sister refused, and it became this drawn out legal battle. There were lawyers involved and lawsuits involved, and then at the end of the whole thing, she won the case, obviously, because it was her money. And when she got the money, she wanted no part of it, and she ended up giving it all away.
Wow.
And that was her retirement money.
Wow.
But she didn't, having the money to her had so much pain attached to it that she couldn't in good consciousness hold on to it.
How do you think that worked after the fact for her? Did she feel relief? Did she feel release?
I don't know. She ended up living with me. She still lives with me. So, what it turned her into was a dependent. But I don't know. She seems happier because of it. She, at least it doesn't give her any taxable income.
This is true.
To be truthful, I really don't know. She's still trying to this day to reconcile with her sister, but her sister's just not having any of it. So if in this particular case, money had a tremendous amount of negative energy attached to it.
Yeah.
And she ended up giving it to, my wife, and she gave it to my sister-in-law. And what we ended up doing with it was we just paid debt with it. And so it was just gone. And then my sister-in-law used it to, pay down her mortgage on a house that she ended up selling at a loss anyway. So the money ended up going away there too.
I find it fascinating that what you just described was a story of two different law of attraction manifestations. On the one hand, you had one person manifesting peace by releasing money, and on the other hand, you had two people who manifested, a cash windfall to eliminate debt. Both manifestations came true in the same story.
Right.
Which is pretty cool.
So if you believe that money is evil, even when you attract it, you're not going to want to hold on to it.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
That's true. Yep. Okay, let's see. Now, there's a person who calls herself Darkest Lord, and her reason, her reason for why people couldn't become millionaires and eliminate poverty is because of the problem of their faith, and she doesn't really elaborate on that. But Daniel agrees with her, says, "Yep, you said it." What do you guys think?
Well,
I think she means that they don't believe in law of attraction.
Okay.
I'll go with that, I guess. But I think it comes back down to what we were saying before about it. It really is, what kind of emotions are you attaching to the money? If you believe that the money is going to bring you happiness, and you really believe that it's going to, that abundance is happiness, then yes, then you will attract it, and there will be good energy attached to it. But if you believe it's wrong, or that how you're getting the money is wrong, and you're, somewhat dirtied by it or sullied by it for whatever reason, then it's only going to lower your vibration the more you have of it. I guess another good example is when I was much younger, I was a telemarketer. And I was very good at my job. And what I was selling was credit cards.
Oh, lovely.
Over the phone.
God, it was you.
It was me. And
the truth comes out.
My best customer is when I would get an elderly person on the line. And they just wanted to talk to somebody because they were usually very lonely or whatever.
Right.
And so I would sell them more stuff that they didn't want at a price they couldn't afford. And I felt awful at the end of the day. I felt dirty at the end of the day. And eventually I just quit the job and they were like, "Why are you leaving? You're doing great." And I'm like,
great is a relative word.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if what you're doing to attract money is, and it comes down to faith too. If what you're doing you believe is hurting people, then it's not going to have the abundant properties that you're looking for. And all that time too, when I was working, I was getting nice bonuses and whatever. I felt poor that whole time because my soul felt poor that whole time, and I never seemed to have any money. It was all gone or whatever. It was just I would spend it and then I'd look at my bank account and was like, "Where's my money?"
Right. Yep. Well, it makes sense. It makes sense. I did try one telemarketing job. It was one of the first jobs I tried after school. And I was there I wasn't even there for a full day. I was there for exactly 2 hours. The first hour was being taught what it is I was going to be doing. Most of the second hour was trying to convince me to actually make a phone call. And I finally picked up the phone and I made one phone call. We were selling these, it was one of these companies that sells meat in bulk and you buy packages and so forth. And to my mindset, the meat was horribly expensive. I thought it was way overpriced. So I made that first phone call. It felt absolutely miserable. I got up, hung up the phone and said, I quit and walked out of the place because I knew right then and there I couldn't make any other phone calls. I literally couldn't pick up the phone after that because it felt so bad. It felt so uncomfortable. So I mean.
And the thing is, you can be a good salesperson if the product that you're selling is something you really can get behind. You know, if you believe that this is going to actually help people, that this is something that's going to, you know, make their lives better, then selling it is easy. And you don't feel bad afterwards because you've just given them something wonderful. You're giving them abundance. You're giving them something, you know, you're giving them more than what they're paying for. And, that's an easy sell.
Well, I like what you said.
You don't feel dirty afterwards.
The only thing I might want to alter, and I say this very deliberately, is it's not that I don't want to feel bad. I want to feel good about it. I want to feel really, really good about it. Just not feeling bad isn't good enough as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
For me, I mean, for other people, I've known plenty of people who could, you know, not feel bad and that's good enough and they're okay. My standard is so ridiculously high that I have to feel great about it in order to sell it, whatever it is. Because at that point, I don't feel like I'm selling it. I feel like I'm just kind of giving it away. And I can do that, you know. but anything less than that, I have a little trouble with. Not that I've not sold stuff before. I mean, I was in business for myself selling web designs for many years, and there were a few times where I'd put, price out for bid, and I would gulp when I did it because I knew that compared to the marketplace, it was a high price. I also knew what I was going to give them in return for it was going to be well above what the marketplace gave them. But nevertheless, there was that thing going on there. And that could be kind of a tough thing at times. But yeah, I'm with you, Bill. You got to feel good about it. You got to feel really good about it. Yeah.
I had a similar experience in telemarketing when I was 16. I worked for a dating service, ironically. And
very.
So this was back in the day before dating apps. So this was back when you would sign up and you would make a video and people would choose you based on your video.
Right.
So my job was to call you at home during dinner and remind you how single you were.
Oh, wonderful.
And how much you needed us. And and you need to pay $79.95 for us to get you married. And I ran into a customer. I was okay with it at the time because the money was good. But I ran into a customer. It was an elderly lady, and this was the worst. This was terrible. It was an elderly lady, and I ended up talking to her, found out her husband was just buried that day.
Oh, dear.
And I was like, oh. I was like, oh my God, I can't. And then my boss was like listening in on the call, and she was like, why aren't you selling? And I was like, are you serious right now? She's like, I'm so sorry. I just got back from my husband's funeral. And I was like, oh my God, I can't. So I never came back after that day.
And she was like, the iron's hot! The iron's hot!
Yeah, exactly. She's newly single. Get in there. So I couldn't do it. I was like, these people have no morals. I can't work with that. And that was at 16. I was like, no, I can't.
It raises an interesting side topic here. And I won't go into the direction where this came up earlier for me today, because it's one of those topics that takes us down rabbit holes, and I don't really want to go down a rabbit hole. But I raised a question in a conversation today: whatever happened to integrity? Because it seems like integrity is almost, it's not that it's non-existent, but it's almost taboo. It's like it's been thrown out the window by so many people, and I'm not quite sure what that's all about. I know there's a law of attraction element going on, probably many of them. But I don't know. Do you guys see the same thing that I'm seeing, that there's this integrity thing going on?
Yep.
You do?
Yes. I feel like everybody's trying too hard to be PC, that they don't want to step on anyone's toes. So they're just all about themselves. And they're like, oh, you're an independent woman. You do your own thing and da-da-da-da. I don't need to hold the door open for you. You know, little things like that build up.
That was quite a long trend there. All leading up to not holding the door for you, like, whoa.
When I teach my accounting class, I spend the entire semester in discussion groups talking about ethics, because it's one area that doesn't get talked about enough. And even when it is talked about, I am sometimes shocked at the responses that my students give me, because it's usually not the direction where the discussion is supposed to be going. And I'm trying to remember the name of the author who wrote Liar's Poker and The Big Short.
Yes, I know who you mean. Michael, what's his last name?
I'm sorry, do you have the book on the ceiling? Is that where you're...
Yeah, that's what it is. It's a good book, too. Liar's Poker is really interesting. Oh, God, what is his name?
We'll Google it for those of you who want to find out.
He's the same guy who wrote the story about the football player.
Yeah, Michael Lewis.
Lewis, that's his name. Lewis, yes.
Michael Lewis. Yeah, but the thing is, when he wrote Liar's Poker, he meant it as an expose of Wall Street.
Right.
But the students at Harvard Business School used it as a how-to guide.
That's awful.
And the thing is, I've heard him say, I've heard him do interviews, and he talked about this. He's like, that wasn't the intention of the book. The intention was to say how bad it was. But again, about the, law of attraction here, he writes this book about how to cheat on Wall Street.
Yeah.
And it attracts people who want to cheat on Wall Street.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Integrity is a little bit of a slippery issue where the law of attraction is concerned, because it does have that moral side to it. And the law of attraction really is not a moral principle at all. It has nothing to do with morality. It has to do with vibration. It has to do with like attracts like. And as your illustration beautifully illustrated, the like in this particular case was a bunch of Harvard students who were willing to do anything in order to make a fortune on Wall Street. It's like, oh, cool, here's the rule book, here's how we do it.
Yeah. And this even brings us back to the using LOA to make $1 million. What is your intention here? Is your intention to make $1 million by taking it away from other people?
Right.
Plenty of people do that.
Do you see the universe as a zero-sum game where you are going to, that by you becoming rich, that means ergo other people have to get poor?
I mean, I knew a guy who used to sell credit cards to people who didn't need credit cards, especially to the elderly. I mean,
right. But what was worse was then I would call the same people up a month later and sell them insurance on the credit card debt.
Oh, you're worse than I am. I'm sorry.
Wow. Well, actually, Bill, then I think you can probably help us understand the mindset here. Because even though now you were teaching an accounting course that had an ethical component to it, you actually have lived on that other side. Do you have a sense of how it is that a person gets to that side? How does someone end up on the dark side?
Well, they end up on the dark side due to pressure, rationalization, and opportunity. Those are that's what they call the fraud triangle.
Fraud triangle, yes. Mm-hmm.
And actually, that is a concept they teach in
it's a legal concept.
Business school.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the fraud triangle. And so there's nothing you can do to prevent the pressure and the rationalization, because those are internal processes. So a company, to prevent fraud, can only address the opportunity aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And when I was in compliance, that was primarily my job, was to try and limit it or eliminate opportunity. But the problem is, if you've got any sort of collusion going on where two or more people decide that they are going to defraud the company or defraud the customer or whatever, all your internal controls can't prevent it. There's no internal control that can prevent a conspiracy.
And plus, as the president keeps pointing out, there's no such thing as a law against collusion. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Right. So, I mean, yes, you can make laws against collusion. Yes, the penalties are a lot worse for collusion, but it still doesn't prevent anybody from doing it.
No, it doesn't.
Right.
No.
Right.
Because if you can justify it, I mean, if pressure is there, because pressure is people feel they don't have enough. Therefore, kid needs braces. The kid, or your, you need a nicer car, or your apartment's falling apart. You want to live in a nicer place. So that's your pressure aspect. Next, you have your rationalization. Well, okay, I know that the boss is a crook, therefore it's okay if I'm a crook too.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how you get ahead in the world.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so there's your cultural aspect. There's your law of attraction part of it. Is that rationalization? Am I taking away from others? Am I going to feel good about that? Or am I going to feel bad about that? Is it okay for me to do something unethical or do something without integrity because other people are doing it, or that because I feel as though my need is more important than somebody else's need? Mm-hmm. And then at that point, if you've already gotten to the point where you have accepted the pressure and you have accepted the rationalization, and now you're just looking for an opportunity, there isn't a internal control system alive that can prevent the determined person who has already made those decisions from committing fraud. Mm-hmm. You can't prevent it. So then as a compliance person, then your thing is, how do we catch them?
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you become a cop.
Yes, exactly. And this is actually a good real world illustration of why it is you can't attract for somebody else.
Right.
You can influence them, but you can't attract for them. And perfect example right here. I was looking at the word consequence yesterday. And the reason I looked at that is consequence has a relatively negative piece of baggage attached to it. So when we talk about consequences, we think about them as being negative consequences. In actual reality, when you look at the root, where the word comes from in Latin and so forth, divide it into two pieces. The second piece is sequence. Well, we know what a sequence is. It's just one thing following another. And the con part, when you look at the Latin derivative, it means together or with. So with the sequence or together with the sequence. It doesn't have a negative component per se. It's just, it's what follows, in other words. That's what a consequence is. A consequence is simply what follows. And when I look at things like integrity, by the way, this is how I resolved the whole integrity question for myself earlier on when I was looking at it. What I realized is that where the law of attraction is concerned and where attracting and manifesting is concerned, no matter what our mindset is, first of all, we're in that mindset because we think that it's going to make us happier. We think that we're going to feel better, regardless of whether we're committing fraud or giving gifts away. Either way, we think that we're going to be happier when we do that. But there's also the second set that because of this cultural landscape that we live within, even if it's all illusion, and I think we deliberate creators agree this is all illusion, nevertheless, we live with this illusion and we work with this illusion, or these illusions, I should say. And within the realm of those illusions, there are actions and there are consequences. That one just kind of tends to follow the other. So, you can have somebody, for instance, who will decide that integrity isn't all that important to them, and they'll follow the path to Wall Street to play liar's poker, and hey, I'm making my millions this way. But an interesting thing happens along the way. Consequences follow. They always follow. And they follow in ways that we often don't see in advance, particularly if we make a decision to go take advantage of somebody else. We think, oh, well, I'll just get away with it. Except that's not what happens. Regardless of whether you get caught, per se, you still never actually get away with it. In one way or another, your actions come back to you because of the law of attraction. And you begin to see the other parts of it, the other sides of it, the other pieces to it, the ones that you weren't seeing the first time around. So, while I found it an interesting question about integrity, what I realized ultimately, it didn't matter. It ultimately doesn't really matter, because what ultimately happens, and I mean, we can all think of, I can certainly think of one particular individual in society who's experiencing it right now. Ultimately, it all comes back to you one way or another. What you put out is what you come back. It's what comes back to you. And you do it, you put it out through your thought process, put it out through your thought process combined with actions. You put it out there in a lot of different ways. That's what we all do when we're living in this world of contrast. Invariably, it always comes back to us. Like attracts like. Vibration attracts vibration. It's just, it really is that. Abraham is right. It's truly, the law of attraction is truly a fair friend in every way.
Yes.
Even though it doesn't seem like it is at times, it always is. Which is an interesting thing. So let's see, what else do we have here for some interesting responses that people gave? Okay, here's a good one from Tiffany. Now, again, the question here was, why could not everyone become a millionaire using the law of attraction so there'd be no poverty? Tiffany replied, because there are karmic reasons that dictate our life's experiences, and due to the karma at play, the laws of attraction do not quite work in the literal way that you are thinking.
Yeah.
Ooh, interesting.
Talk about that, Bill. Why?
Yeah, we touched on that when we were talking about how your soul has certain experiences that it came into this lifetime to experience, and on top of that, what I often tell my clients, especially when I'm talking to them about some horrific experiences where they had when they were children, is that we work under the belief, under the system, the understanding that we come into this lifetime with a certain set of experiences we want to experience. And to do that, we make deals with the other souls in our lives, our parents in particular. So we pick our parents, we pick our siblings, we pick our friends, and we do this all before we're born.
Yep.
And so, I was meeting with a client recently, and she was like, well, my father sexually abused me. Did I choose that? And I said, yes, you did choose that because you needed to learn something from that experience. And she looked at me like I had 5 heads and whatever. So, we pulled out the charts.
Well,
again,
you do have 5 heads. You haven't looked in the mirror lately, have you? No,
yeah. So, we pull out the charts and we allow high self to tell us what those lessons are. And so, what was the lesson here? So we learned what the lesson was. And I said, does this make sense to you? And she was there with tears running down her eyes. And she was like, oh my God, that's exactly it.
Wow.
That's what I needed to learn. And so we cleared it. And there it is. And it was done at that point. And now we know that she won't need to re-experience that karma in a future lifetime, because not only did her soul experience it, but it learned what it needed to learn before it moved on.
Mm-hmm.
And without giving away the details of her situation, because obviously that's confidential, can you give us like a taste of like what kind of stuff are we talking about that made it necessary from her soul's perspective to do this?
A desire for self-punishment usually comes up. Let's see. We have a chart of discordant energies, and it's a huge chart. It's a circle chart with an inner fan and an outer fan, and it's got all sorts of horrible things in there, like failure, excesses, escapism, envy, stinginess, spiritual suicide, sexual abuse, and it's got it's all kinds of terrible things in there. And so when we identify the cast of characters involved, we identify the different souls involved, then we go to this chart to identify the flavor. What is the dominant emotion surrounding this particular person's bad life experience? And it's always personal. It's always what the soul wants to learn. And then when we put the flavor onto the situation, that's usually when it clicks for the person who I'm working with. Because now we got the dominant emotion attached, and then we are able to move out, and then we're able to clear it and move on. And that hits a layer of it, but sometimes then that goes to a deeper layer and a deeper layer, because people who experience really bad situations in early life will also tend to repeat those situations in later life with relationships and abusive spouses and whatever, especially if you haven't learned from the first experience. If you didn't learn from the first experience, then you repeat it again. And if you didn't learn from that one, you repeat it again, you repeat it again. This is why people come to see me, because they have a repeating pattern where they're always attracting the wrong things into their lives, and they want to know what is it my soul is trying to learn here that is attracting these bad things into my life. So then we clear that, we figure out what it is, we clear it, and then we're able to end the pattern, and then they're able to attract a more positive experience in their lives.
Alex, you were shaking your head up and down there, like that was resonating with you.
Yeah, that's totally what I believe, that you've already, when you're a celestial being, you've already chosen your path before you come down here. Mm-hmm. So you've already chosen your parents. You've chosen the people that are going to rub you the wrong way. You've chosen to learn those lessons. You've chosen the people that are going to love you. You've chosen everything already. So, in a way we have a set path, but in a way we also can choose which way down the road we want to go.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Bill, you said something interesting in there toward the beginning of that little description. You said that one of the motivations is self-punishment.
Yeah, and a desire for self-punishment. That comes up often.
Yeah, and I find that fascinating because in my own development, I've come to the conclusion that we're really rough on ourselves as human beings, and that we all are. We're really rough on ourselves. So it makes me wonder, when we're making these decisions, according to what you guys are talking about here, we're making them when we're in the non-physical. We're not in our physical bodies yet. So we're still in a high vibration place when we're making these decisions. And so the question that comes to my mind is, why do I want to put myself into a position where I punish myself? And the reason I ask that question is I now understand here in my lifetime now, we punish ourselves far too much. So there's my question. How can you help me reconcile that question? Because I'm not sure how to do it.
For the experience. Because when you're in a high vibration place in the non-physical realm, you can't really punish yourself there. But in this particular physical lifetime, because we're in a low vibration, a low density vibration, we actually have the ability to punish ourselves, and we punish ourselves in order to understand the contrast.
Mm-hmm.
In order to understand the contrast, meaning what?
To understand, and the only way we can truly understand the contrast is by experiencing the contrast.
Okay.
But the nice thing though is the ray of hope here is that as we are becoming more ascended human beings, as more ascended souls, we now know that we can shed ourselves of that contrast. We've experienced the contrast, now we can clear the contrast, and we can live more ascended lives in the physical realm.
Okay.
It is possible. It is possible to live a more ascended life.
Oh, that part I have no trouble with. I totally buy into that part. I'm still having trouble understanding why it is somebody wants to punish themselves.
Again, it's not like it's a conscious choice. It's not like you wake up one morning and say, hey, I want to punish myself real bad today and break out the whip and start hitting yourself in the back or whatever. It has to do with a desire and unhappiness. It has to do with what did I say here? Your unhappiness, doubt, hate of self, a desire to be just hard on yourself, I guess. And again, it's one of those things where when I describe it to people, they're like, why would I choose that for myself? And the reason is your soul wanted to experience it.
And now we're coming in close to where it is that I'm stumbling on this. Because if I'm in a non-physical place, a high vibration place by definition, because everything we know about it says that when you're non-physical, you're in a high vibration place. You're feeling good. You're feeling great.
Right.
And you're choosing this really, really painful experience. So why would I want to choose a real painful experience in that place? Well, your answer was to experience the contrast. But here's the reason I have trouble with that. The reason I have trouble with that is my understanding is virtually all of us in that non-physical place have been here countless times. It's not like we've never done this before. You know, we've been through this a few times. So we have a pretty good idea that when you get here, there's plenty of contrast. Did we just forget? Did we have like this huge mindless experience of like, wow, I can't remember that I had all this contrast and it all affected me in this big way? No. I got actually dive deeper off at the deep end in order to experience even more contrast than I did before. Like, really?
Right. Well, I mean, again, it's funny because if you've ever done any kind of improvisational workshops, like acting, or you get up on stage and you acting out a scene.
I have not, but I'm aware of the concept.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you're acting out an improvisational scene, the more interesting scenes are the ones where you can really up the stakes. Mm-hmm. What actors call the yes and. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so in order to make the scene more interesting and more entertaining for the audience, you yes and it. You yes and you build it and you make it more and more dramatic. And so and now, even though that you are not actually living that, you're still the observer. So your soul is the observer. The non-physical part of your body, of you, is the observer. And you want to really understand this contrast thing. And so you yes and your life. You make it as dramatic and as painful as possible, so that way you could really, really understand and embody and really understand on a visceral level of what that pain is all about. But it's all an illusion. And so, through the work that I do and through the work that, through law of attraction and whatever, you start to shed that illusion. And you're like, oh, wait a second, I don't really need to experience that anymore. I've been there, done that. I got the T-shirt. I'm okay.
The T-shirt is ripped down the back, but nevertheless.
Right. And so I learned my lesson. I'm good to go. And now I'm going to move on.
It sounds like a very beautifully laid out justification for dysfunction. I mean, it's beautifully expressed. It really is.
Well, the thing it is your own dysfunction, and we own our dysfunction. And the thing is, you got to own, and that was what a lot of the other life coaches say too. You got to own your own dysfunction before you can shed it, before you can get rid of it. You own who you are and with all of your faults and whatever, and then at that point once you understand yourself, then you can let all that go.
Yeah, it still seems a little bit batty to me, but whatever.
There's a lot of things that go over Walt's head.
Over, around, through, it's just, it's an amazing thing. My head just doesn't wrap around certain things, and that's apparently not one of them. I've played out in my mind this scenario of being in the non-physical realm. Actually, let me take you just gave a nice description, a nice analogy of the actor who plays it out. Okay. Yes and. Interesting thing that goes along with this. Actors do like playing those parts the most. And the reason that they give for it is, they don't say it this way, but what it amounts to is they can play the role out without the consequences that come with it.
Right.
They can be Adolf Hitler without suffering what Adolf Hitler suffered.
Right.
But here's the interesting thing that makes that not true. Mm-hmm. There are so many actors who play really, really nasty roles who often die from stuff very similar to the thing they played in the roles. I mentioned the TV series The West Wing. John Spencer, who played Leo McGarry, who played the chief of staff in the television show, in one of the later series, has a heart attack. His character has a heart attack at Camp David, and they don't discover him for like 24 hours or 36 hours or something like that. John Spencer himself died of a heart attack months later. So here's a case of an actor who was playing this really horrific part, thinking that there are no actual consequences that come from it, and he gets consequences that come from it.
Yeah. And actually, my twin, I have an identical twin brother who was an actor.
Oh, really?
And he played. He was telling me once about a role that he had to play, a very dramatic role. What was it? Inherit the Wind. He was playing. He was playing the main prosecutor in Inherit the Wind.
Okay.
And so that role took a lot out of him because first of all, the character's beliefs were very contrary to his own. Mm-hmm. They were there, and then on top of that, he played the role so well that he actually was feeling physically ill afterwards.
Wow.
Because that character too dies of a heart attack at the end of the play.
Yeah.
And so, and yes, actors do sometimes suffer the consequences of whatever role that they're playing, which is why it's so important for actors to maintain that observer distance even when they're playing a role. And experienced actors know this.
Oh yeah. Well, you can tell on the interviews the experienced actors
Right.
are constantly talking about, it's the same theme over and over again, how close-knit the cast was, how well everybody got along. They were having so much fun on the set. Over and over and over again, you can just tell that's their defense mechanism. That's how they're using that as a way to contrast what it is they're actually playing in the drama, and they're offsetting it in that way. I guess the one way I can kind of come to terms with this concept as you're laying it out, and I've heard this before, so it's not totally unfamiliar to me, but the one way I can kind of make sense out of it, it's like somebody who likes to go to the horror films, but they don't actually believe what they see in the horror film. It's not like they actually fear that's going to happen in their lives. They just go because it's fun to be scared by the horror film. But they walk out of the movie, and if they're interviewed, they're saying, "No, I don't really think Jaws is going to, take a bite out of my leg." So they just dismiss that part of it. They just think that it's so fun and so exciting. Their emotions are so elevated and so forth. And if I look at it that way, I guess I can kind of get that. That would sort of make some sense.
Yeah, but then what about the other people who are going to see the movie and now they're never swimming in the ocean again?
Right.
And that's what I would call it, the unintended consequence.
Right. And I that's why I don't watch horror films myself, because I empathize too much with the victim. And because I'm empathizing with the victim, I get more scared than when I should, and then I end up leaving, and I'm like, why did I do that to myself?
It's an ongoing thing between Louise and me. She likes watching, what's the name of it? It's one of the cop shows. It's a big cop show. Tom Selleck. Blue Bloods. She likes watching Blue Bloods.
Yeah,
episodes.
good show.
You like that one? Drives me nuts. Because we have a relatively small apartment, so when she has the TV on, first of all, she cranks it up loud, which means that no matter where I am in the apartment, I can't get away from it. And there's all this anger going on, and frustration and rage and fights and all this other stuff going on, and I can't get away from it. And so I keep thinking to myself, why have I put myself in this place of hearing all this stuff going on that I don't want to have part of my psyche, and yet I'm bombarding myself with it this way? And I finally came to the conclusion that I'm using it as a way to practice putting up my mental boundaries against it, saying, I'm not letting that in. That's just not me. I'm just not even going to focus on it. I'm not even going to think about it. Sometimes I have to close the door to accomplish that, but nevertheless, that seems to be what I'm doing, because it keeps going on, it keeps continuing. So clearly, I'm giving some attention to it for some reason. That's the best explanation I have right now. It's my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay.
So with that in mind, well, that was fun. That was an interesting conversation. We only got about 1/4 of the way through the post. I mean, it shows you can get a lot of material to talk about by going through these posts and all the different perspectives that people have up on there. So I will thank the people who posted their perspectives, because it gave us a lot to talk about. That was great. Bill, before we go, do you want to tell people about your service and how they can reach out to you if they're interested in helping to get something cleared from their background? There's some low-level spirits bugging them or something like that?
That sounds great. Actually, I can be found at Vital Bioenergetics on Facebook, but the website is ninagee.com. It's NINAGEE.com. Just look me up, and you'll see what my services are. I do a thing called spiritual response therapy, and I can do this. I do this in person, or I can do it remotely over WebEx or Skype or whatever. Works just as fine no matter where you are.
Very good. All right. And Alex, anything you got to tell us about the podcast? I know you were thinking about getting another one up there, but any news that we should know about where your podcast is concerned?
It's now gone from weekly to monthly.
Ah, okay.
So sad for my fans, but
well,
it's more news in a longer length of time. So
okay, so you're packing it into each episode. They're getting more bang for their buck each time, is what it amounts to.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, that's good. That's good. When's the next one scheduled for?
At some point this week.
Oh, okay. So it's coming up soon. Very good. All right, then. Well, then we'll leave it at that. Thank you guys very much. Look forward to talking to you, Bill, next week. And Alex will be talking to you really soon, because we're doing like 3 shows a week now. So thank you guys very much.
Yeah, tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning. That's right. Yeah. Okay. And we thank our listeners.
Always a pleasure.
Oh, glad to have you, Bill. Thanks to all our listeners. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.